You're watching us live on Free Press Journal. We are here to talk about the Union Budget 2025. Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman unveiled her eighth consecutive union budget earlier this morning. The income tax rebates are the biggest talking point. Is the middle class satisfied? What is the common citizen telling us? And we have enough reactions now from various sectors, from the other side of the political divide as well, reacting to various aspects of the budget. There are schemes announced for the MSME to promote the new sectors that come in, the startups, as it were, women, farmers, education sector. A lot of announcement to boost exports, since, as we know now, the rupee has lost potency with relation to the dollar. So there again, some important announcements have been made, from capex to cash in people's hands. Let's take a closer look at the announcements, in fact, that were made earlier today. I have with me, joining me here on the program, Sanjay Jha, who's been prolific with his inputs on various national issues, including the budget, where I read his comments earlier today and I said I must have Sanjay on the program. Thank you so much for joining us, Sanjay Jha. Good to have you.
Thank you, Afrida. Wonderful to be here.
Let's then begin with your opening comments, your initial observations on Budget 2025. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a very iffy budget and frankly, extremely disappointing. And I'll tell you why. India is in a proper structural, what is called as an economic slowdown. I would not use the word meltdown yet because 6.4% means you have an opportunity to try and recalibrate the growth levels.
Yeah.
The problem is that India is witnessing a real challenge on all the four critical components of growth, which is one, private consumption, second is private investment, third will be government expenditure, and the fourth will be exports. Now,
Okay.
if you look at the budget on the exports, I would say there was going to be considerable worry because of the tariffs and the US creating this whole backlash by indulging in a currency war if necessary. So
Yeah.
India's exports have remained largely flat. Government expenditure is the only component that has actually been driving the Indian economy for a long time, especially post pandemic. But even that tapered off during last year. If you look at private investment, that's been extremely disappointing, despite the massive tax cuts that were given in 2019, which resulted in the corporate sector getting a windfall of 150,000 crores in tax savings, which means if you add it for the last 6 years, the tax write offs done by the central government is around 10 lakh crores on the tax breaks given to the private sector. But it resulted in no investment and no jobs as was promised in 2019, which brings you to the last point, demand, consumption demand. And today there has been a lot of buzz about the income tax relief. Now, there is no denying that demand being low has been a significant factor why the Indian economy has been sluggish. I'm not denying that, Afrida. In fact, we have been very vocal that you need to boost demand, both urban as well as rural. Now,
Yeah.
giving the tax relief is a good thing. I think everybody will welcome it. The middle class has gone through a very difficult time. But
Yeah.
I'm not able to understand the hype that a lot of mainstream media and particularly the BJP is creating over it. And I'll explain that very, very quickly for you and
Sure.
then take the next question. If you look at the number of people who are actually taxpayers, overall, if you look at the number of people who will benefit by it, this will be around 2.5 to 3%. And for anyone to believe that by saving this amount, the entire amount will be spent, and therefore producers will find a reason to invest to meet the demand for goods and services, and that will boost the economy, that is being extremely myopic. Number one, there's a time lag between the time that people get that little saving and they decide what to do with it. So, hypothetically, if a person is getting 12 lakhs and they're saving 80,000 rupees because there's no tax, now then 80,000 rupees in effect is around 6,500 rupees per month. Now, he or she is not going to spend the entire money right away in month one. They are
Hmm.
going to probably save some money because everyone wants to worry about saving for the rainy day. So not
Hmm.
all of it is going to be spent. Some of it is going to be actually invested, and a certain amount will be, for example, spent.
Hmm.
Is that component of what is spent going to trigger an economic revival? It's a
Hmm.
joke, because this is like applying band-aid to a person who's actually bleeding pretty profusely. It's not
Hmm.
going to solve your problem. What it will
Hmm.
do is definitely give a certain fillip to certain mass consumption goods that a middle class person normally consumes. The
Yeah.
problem is inflation is already going to eat up this gain. You see, if
Hmm.
inflation is going to be at any levels, food inflation is 8 or 9%. If food inflation itself consumes a large chunk of whatever you are saving, and over and above that, the biggest problem is that you are not able to really back the rural expenditure through Manrega. Look at Manrega allocations. They have actually not changed, they have actually gone down as a proportion of GDP. So to
Hmm.
believe that the middle class is going to turn it around is extremely faulty. It will create some sectors may get some gain maybe by the end of the coming year. Number
Hmm.
two, Manrega allocations have not changed. In fact, they have gone down net of inflation, which means large sections of rural India are not going to experience any change at all. Remember, the middle class, large chunks of middle class doesn't pay any tax ever. So for them, it doesn't make any difference anyway. And the
Yeah.
third point is, if you don't create jobs, Afrida, jobs means I get a certain job, I get an income. When I
Hmm.
get an income, I
So
save some
yeah.
and I spend. That's not
Hmm.
going to happen.
So you are saying you're not convinced that this is any growth stimulus for us. You are saying this is not any budget that could potentially create jobs, and those two, I agree with you, are major areas of concern.
Yeah, I would say so, because the economic
Hmm.
survey actually points out something very interesting yesterday.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
says to the government, get out of the way. Strong words coming from the chief economic advisor, telling the
Hmm.
government that we have probably created a lot of regulatory cholesterol, bureaucratic red tape. Number
Hmm.
two, it also tells and talks about, this whole culture of trust deficit. What is trust deficit? Private sector industrialists today, Afrida, are fearing the ED CBI income tax culture that India has got into. There's a
Hmm.
chilling effect of tax terrorism. And I think that is keeping a lot of the private investment away. So even if people start spending money, to expect the private sector, which is already sitting on excess capacity, to start investing is not going to happen overnight.
Hmm. Uh, in the agricultural sector, and I'm putting it out on our screens as well. Let me just have that on our screens first. Yes, underemployment in agriculture will be addressed. 1.7 crore farmers will benefit. There is an attempt to assuage the fears, the doubts that the farming community has, the annadata, as it were. So, a lot of emphasis on that area. Are you convinced that this will go a long way?
If you look at the agricultural sector, even the growth there has decelerated already. It saw some momentum, has come down already. The farmers are protesting on a very straightforward demand. Give us a legal assurance on the MSP. You do that, I think you are able to actually assuage a lot of the farmers, that they are able to sell their produce at a certain price, which guarantees them a certain cushion to produce more and to have their own savings. I don't think the government has any degree of credibility with the farming community. You can see that the protests are still going on. So I do
Yeah.
feel that where the rural sector is concerned, end of day, this government has ignored it for far too long. I was expecting actually the MSME sector to be given a lot more impetus. Remember one thing, Afida,
There is
that
a term loans up to 20 crore, which the government has promised to the
yeah, but
MSME sectors.
that's absolutely negligible. It is frankly not going to cut ice at all. I
Hmm.
believe that at this point of time, it is not just about giving access to credit. It was also about how you ensure that they are able to, frankly speaking, get a bigger boost by getting the government, for example, to become a bigger procurer of a lot of goods and services. Remember, large scale companies are actually able to make MSMEs bend to their requirements. Many of them don't even pay them on time. I think the other problem that you have with the MSMEs, these are the largest employers of India. But
Yeah.
because of on and the very extremely ham-handed way by which GST was executed, many of them never recovered. Please remember one very critical data point, that
Hmm.
after demonetization, India has been on a slowdown. In
Hmm.
2019-20 pre-pandemic, your GDP was 4%. Pre-pandemic was
Hmm.
4%. And if you look at post-pandemic till now, you have grown at 5%. If you look at the NDA government of Mr. Modi between 2014 to 24, their growth was around 6%, lower than the UPA between 2004 to 14 of around 7.8% on the old GDP
So,
revision.
what would you say the government is doing wrong here? Where would you make the course corrections?
I would say that the government is wrong. I'll tell you where. Number one,
Hmm.
they need to pump in a lot more money into India's rural purchasing power. What they have done for the middle class, I think they could do a lot more. I'm
Hmm.
also saying that they should have been able to be bold enough to tax the very wealthy at a higher rate, which they haven't done. So above
Hmm.
a certain 25 lakh, everybody pays the same. Does it make any sense at all?
Yeah.
Think about
Yeah.
it. Think about
Hmm.
it, that many people in media, for example, or anywhere else in the world, they are earning more than 25. I
Hmm.
mean, they are paying the same rate of tax which is being paid by some very wealthy people, although somebody will argue that they pay some surcharge. The other
Hmm.
problem that you have is that
Yeah.
today you need to reduce this entire climate or culture of political vendetta. Until and unless industry believes that they can do things, they can start a new industry, they can expand without questions being asked, people are going to be very paranoid. Nobody invests in an uncertain world. And the
Hmm.
third thing that I would do is to also, and this is a political statement, but I'm telling you it's very relevant, a government that is not able to create a climate of oneness, of social harmony, will struggle to get you economic growth. People will tell you that authoritarian regimes can bully people and get results like China, but
Yeah.
China doesn't struggle with the kind of issues of social, divisiveness that we see in our country because of
Hmm.
whatever
Hmm.
reason. Maybe they are more controlled and tight-fisted. But the
Yeah.
bottom line is that we are struggling in our country, and I do
Hmm.
believe that one other change that can be done in India is to, frankly speaking, realize that you are not going to be able to create jobs or manufacturing without making the private sector a big player. And the government should only focus on issues like education and health, where their investment in this budget has not been enough. So these are some of the
You.
broader issues I would do if I had a role to play.
Yeah, I'll take your comments on the announcements on education sector, Sanjay Jha, and let's put that up on our screens as well. In terms of additional seats to be inculcated in medical institutions, 10,000 additional seats, 75,000 medical seats in 5 years. Uh, a lot of focus on having education, students who want to pursue medicine accommodated, those who don't get seats, and there we know the sort of ruckus, the sort of chaos that prevails around that time of the year when there are neat results and all of that. But there is an attempt here to create more space for them in government
I,
education
I think
institutions.
I think Afrida, India has lost the demographic dividend story. And I'm going to call it out early because people will tell you that we're a young country with so much of potential in our labor or our work market, and we should be taking advantage of that. The truth is we're missing it year after year. I'm telling you, this budget silence on jobs should be something as a very worrying signal for not just politicians but for policymakers, for industrialists. The skilling missions haven't really delivered. And let me tell you that you are adding around 20 million to your workforce year after year. And education to create actually skilled people ready for jobs. Do you realize the problem? In India, you have people who are educated, but they're not employable, which means that the education is just a degree without any practical relevance or value. In a reality, your education should be making you ready to go and start working on day one. Then you have an intermediate gap of skilling, and then to make that person employable. These are all costs. Plus, they are a drag on time. And if you're not able to get your people delivering, your output is never going to be there. You're not going to get a cost competitive advantage over other countries. That's one of the reasons, Afrida, why the China plus one story, if you remember, when China slowed and people said after pandemic, people will remove their business and give it to Southeast Asia and India, etc. India has
Yeah.
got like 10, 15% of the China plus one policies advantage. It has not really
Hmm.
come to us at all. So
Hmm.
India has a problem. And I'm telling you, as somebody argued the other day, I think it was a McKinsey article, will India
Hmm.
become old before it becomes affluent? And I think India is going to become old very quickly, and we will
Hmm.
not yet have made it to the, what they call as a medium income. Forget being a Viksit Bharat and all that. You might struggle to even be then in the medium income group. So I think there are a lot of fundamental problems, and it's
Hmm.
largely government created. And the chief economic advisor has exposed that in the economic survey report.
Right. I take your point, Sanjay, and you rightly said about how the certain section beyond 24 lakhs per annum are not taxed enough. This is the tax slab. I mean, we're just running. We do know that there is an old tax regime and a new tax regime, and this is a revised version of the new tax regime. So what
Right.
changes would you have liked to see? A quick last comment, and we wind up, Sanjay.
Well, I can tell you that I don't want to invest too much of time on just the income tax structure, but I
Hmm.
do believe that number one, you need fewer slabs. I would have had fewer slabs, not as many. Number two, I
Hmm.
would have taxed those people at a higher level more. And I'll tell you two reasons behind it. In
Hmm.
terms of India's tax ratio compared to GDP, we are amongst the lowest in the world for a very big sized economy. I mean, we are around 18%. And
Yeah.
I'm worried that if you have given away 1 lakh crore this time, which was necessary to do for the middle class, but where are you going to raise the money from? And they're talking about increasing tax revenue. Nobody has any idea where the money is going to come from. The
Hmm.
second worry that we all should have, that if you look at Indian data, the government expenditure from tax revenue is one of the highest in India. The
Yes.
government expenditure from tax revenue is around, I was reading a report, around 78%, which means that if your tax revenue is not going to be adequate, government expenditure will come down, which it already has. Supposing hypothetically that the
Hmm.
middle class spends the entire money that they save, but if government expenditure comes down or the budget size itself is not big enough, the Indian economy will struggle to grow. And if you don't
Right.
get an 8%, 8.5% growth rate, then the India story is, frankly speaking, evaporating.
Right. On that note, thank you so much, Sanjay. I do understand there are strong concerns. You've articulated them for our viewers. I leave it to our viewers, to our listeners to put in their comments, tell us where you think Sanjay is right or where you would like to counter his point of view. We are always open to discussion. Thanks very much, Sanjay, for
Thank
making
you,
time for
Afrida.
us today. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
We'll continue to play reactions to the union budget, and let's first also take a look
Development
at
measures
the budget
span
speech.
10 broad
Here
areas
is Nirmala
focusing
Sitharaman
on
concluding.
Garib, youth, Annadata, and Nari, spurring agricultural growth and productivity, building rural prosperity and resilience, taking everyone together on an inclusive growth path, boosting manufacturing and furthering Make in India, supporting MSMEs, enabling employment-led development, investing in people, economy, and innovation, securing energy supplies, promoting exports, and nurturing innovation. For this journey of development, our four powerful engines are agriculture, MSME, investments, and exports. The fuel, our reforms, our guiding spirit, inclusivity, and the destination, Vikasit Bharat. This budget aims to initiate transformative reforms across 6 domains. During the first 5 years, these will augment our growth potential and global competitiveness. The domains are taxation, power sector, urban development, mining, financial sector, and regulatory reforms. Agriculture as the first engine. Now I move to specific proposals, beginning with agriculture as the first engine.